Hello, everyone. From the Medical Missionary Training Institute, we would like to welcome you to our webinar. So, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Medical Missionary Training Institute, we offer online health training through short courses as well as through a full medical missionary or health evangelism course. So I'd like to just take you through our website quickly, and then you can see all the courses that we offer. Maybe visit our website and hey, why not sign up for a course that interests you? So we also have a brand new health coaching course that will be starting on the 15th of January 2023. Now this is a 12-week course which will be conducted on Zoom for your convenience so that you can participate from the comfort of your home. It will be live on Zoom every Sunday from 3 p.m. So, back to the webinars. We do these bi-weekly health webinars as part of our health education program and medical missionary training. They will be mostly on Sundays, but please get onto our database so that you don't miss our notices. Simply send a WhatsApp message to May at 065 907 5031 or email me at may.solomon@gmail.com. And today we have with us Dr. Bruce Webb, who will be talking to us about inflammation and disease. Dr. Bruce is specializing in anesthetics, and he has a great passion for functional medicine. He's been doing research in functional medicine for quite a number of years now. So over to you then, Dr. Bruce. Inflammation and disease. Thank you.
This topic today is extremely important, and I'm just going to see if I can open my presentation just to get things moving. 1 second. So, inflammation and disease, quenching the fire within. And if you look at the spectrum of disease that people are facing today, there's been a massive shift in the nature of diseases that are coming to the fore. And at the moment, inflammatory diseases are killing 60% of people that die from a chronic disease across the world. And we'll see that, so inflammation has become the buzzword of 21st century medicine. And many of the diseases that people are facing have an inflammatory basis. So we really need to understand what inflammation is and what is it that's causing us to become more inflamed, and what can we do about it? And that's the purpose of today's talk. And ultimately, and this is the key, this is the crux, the crown of the brain is our frontal lobe, and the organ that is most affected by inflammation is ultimately the brain. And we're going to see the impact that inflammation has on the brain, some of the symptoms that your brain might be inflamed, and what you can do about it. And what's profound is, just as a preface to our conversation, is that our ability to think clearly, to rationalize, to make good judgments is affected by how well our brain is functioning. And one of the things that's fundamentally affecting people's thought processes and how their brains are working is inflammation and toxicity. So we know that Satan is attacking the mind on every level, and inflammation is another one of those lifestyle challenges that we face that take away from optimum brain functioning. So this is a very important topic, and it's not just about learning some of the triggers of systemic inflammation, but ultimately what it does to the brain and how we can stop that. This is the point. So there's two types of inflammation. Inflammation is essentially a response to injury, and the body has an immune system, as we've looked at before. It's got an innate immune system and what's called an adaptive immune system. So the innate is sort of barriers and cells that line the barriers, and then an adaptive immune system which can respond and create a specific response to a particular injury. When we injure ourselves, the classic signs we know of inflammation are redness, swelling, pain. So rubor, dolor, color, pallor is what we learned at med school. There's certain pathological features of acute inflammation. What's actually happening is you're getting dilation of blood vessels, you're getting release of histamine, and you're getting a whole bunch of inflammatory mediators called cytokines, which are released by the white blood cells to bring other cells into the area and allow passage or transmigration, you'll see in that picture, of white cells into the area that's been damaged. That's acute inflammation. It's protective. It's designed by God to sort out an injury and is very good at what it does, but it's supposed to be switched off. It's not supposed to be chronic. So chronic inflammation becomes the problem. And when this repair system or this alert system is constantly activated, that's when we run into problems. So what are some of the things that can cause chronic inflammation? So if we fail to eliminate the infective agents, so some microbes are pretty good at evading the immune system's total elimination. They can hide out sequestered in various tissues. That can be a cause of chronic inflammation. Many of us will have got, I don't know if you remember as a kid, you might have got a thorn in your finger or your toe, and you forgot about it. And maybe even months later, you found out this thing was still there and the body had walled it off and sort of half pushed it out. And that, so if you get a foreign material or something stuck in your tissue, that can be a source of chronic inflammation. Dental care is so important. If there's dental caries, if there's root canals that need to be done, or that's a whole separate topic, but if there's a damage or an area infection in a tooth, an abscess that's not addressed, that can be a source of chronic inflammation. An autoimmune condition can be a source of chronic inflammation. And then this last one, sorry, I'm just trying to see if I can move this box. There we go. So I just want to change this grid view. That's better. So look at that last box. Inflammatory and biochemical inducers are causing oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. That's particularly important for the brain. We're going to look at that. If there's some sort of inciting stimulus that's causing a grumbling background inflammation in the brain or in the tissue, that's another issue. So let's just quickly move on here. So like I said, 3 out of every 5 people around the world, which is 60% of the world, die from a disease that has been linked to inflammation. That's a huge amount. So heart and blood vessels, atherosclerosis, we know that coronary artery disease is an inflammatory disease. Digestive system, you've got Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, various forms of arthritis and autoimmune arthritis, all the way down through the different systems. Diseases with an inflammatory basis, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, like I said, autoimmune disease, depression, and Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So then now, just let me know if you can't hear me or see me, so because I've lost sight of I just can see May's face now, which is fine. I just need to know that you can hear me. If it's not, just let me know. So depression is an inflammatory disease. There's an inflammatory component to it, which is now why they're considering that, obviously it's traditional antidepressants don't have an anti-inflammatory component. So they're now considering, that being an inflammatory condition, we need to think of other ways to deal with depression as well. And so many of these conditions that people are suffering from are, like we believe, consequences, not primary problems. So if we look at acute inflammation versus chronic inflammation, you'll see there the linkage between the two. So those are some of the causes on the left and some of the consequences on the right. And that's a difference in looking at the distribution of disease in 1900 compared to 2010. So if you look on the left, the bar graph on the left, you've got principally infective diseases. So in the early 1900s, people were dying of infective processes. Now it's heart disease, cancer, autoimmunity. And in fact, I heard a stat the other day that said that autoimmune conditions have exceeded cardiovascular disease and cancer together in terms of incidence. So we are inflamed and in trouble and on fire. And this is what this talk is about. Why? So annual number of deaths, cancer, cardiovascular disease, the overlap between the two. So acute inflammation on the left being good, chronic inflammation, ongoing process associated with those kind of syndromes or presentations. Why are we more inflamed? What are the causes of chronic inflammation? So some of the causes, multiple sensitivities to foods. Our guts have been damaged. We've spoken about this a lot. If you fail to address a gut issue and heal your gut and identify things that you're reacting to, you have a chronic source of inflammation in your body. And the profound thing is that if you have a leaky gut, you have a leaky brain. That's the amazing and scary thing. So what's affecting your gut is affecting your brain. Dysbiosis is the wrong bugs, environmental toxins, dietary and lifestyle triggers, and chronic stress. And we're going to see how stress increases inflammation. May, are you still with me? You can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. Thank you, Bruce.
So let's look at stress. So stress, and if you want to be practical, which is the whole point of a talk like this, is that we take practical points away that we can help ourselves with and others. Stress, the first thing to control is stress. The stress, if you look at that, you see that section there where that ACTH is. Can you see my pointer?
Yeah.
So when you have stress, you release a hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone from the brain. And stress is, as we know, a continuum. There's good stress and bad stress, stress that brings us to an improved function, but then beyond a certain point, stress becomes detrimental. And we need to be realistic about, and some of the challenges we face where we are at the hospital and the busyness, it's just crazy. There's no accolade to being constantly busy that you have no time for everything else or anything else that's important. We wear busyness as an accolade, and it's not. And I was saying to a colleague of mine the other day, this is not something to brag about, that I'm so busy I've got no time for something else. This is not how life is supposed to be. And we have to be intentional, especially as Christians. We have to be intentional to take time out for rest and recreation and for the important things, and to switch off the alarm signal. I think the evil one tries to keep us busy beyond, and stress. So we have to be deliberate about that. And stress increases ACTH. That's adrenocorticotropic hormone, which increases your cortisol production. And then there's a NF-kappa beta, which is released in the bottom there. And then you've got pro-inflammatory cytokines, which then set up inflammation in the brain and in the system. So stress is a cause of chronic inflammation. And one of the things that it does is it drops your monoamine neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin. So stress, if you chronically stress, if you take a dog and lock him up in a room and you beat him every day, this is a terrible analogy, but I mean, if you beat him every day and you make him afraid, that dog is going to get depressed. Stress creates a depressive state in the brain, and inflammation is one of the ways that it does that. So that's important. So stress control. That's another picture showing the CRH, pro-inflammatory cytokines, being released, which suppress the monoamines, and they actually divert the pathway of some of the amino acids that are used to make neurotransmitters into a pro-inflammatory pathway in the brain, which I can show you in a picture. Another thing that increases inflammation is age. As we age, we naturally become more inflamed. So there's a couple of things that happen as we age that are inevitable, but that we can mitigate. And inflammation, when we age, we become more inflamed. There's a change in the balance of our cytokines and the way the immune system works. So it tends to predominate or push towards an inflammatory status. We become more insulin resistant when we age, which means we can't eat like we were when we were 15. We have to change how we eat, what we eat, how much we eat, and how we move if we want to stay metabolically healthy. So to expect that we operate like our teenage children is not realistic. We become different as we age. And the great thing about the health message and the way God has designed us, even in a fallen world, is that we can have health at every age if we tick the right boxes. We can be healthy at 50. We can be healthy at 60. A 60-year-old is not going to have the reserve of a 20-year-old, but you can still be a healthy 60-year-old. And so that's the goal there. Let me just admit someone there, sorry. So aging is another factor. Overnutrition. So we eat too much, we sit too much, and we move too little. So this is an old one, but inflammation is closely correlated with the amount of body fat you have. The more body fat you carry, the more inflamed you are, bottom line. So fat is a source of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So cytokines are the mediators that are released, during an inflammatory response, like I said. And fat tissue releases adipokines and adiponectins and tumor necrosis factor, various chemicals that are pro-inflammatory. One of the theories is that fat doesn't have a very good blood supply and sometimes can sort of outgrow itself in a sense, and so is like tissue that's sending out these distressing cytokines. So the more fat we carry, the more inflamed we are. The more inflamed we are, the more insulin resistant we are. the more insulin resistant we are, the more fat we carry. And the more fat we carry, the more inflamed we are. And so the vicious cycle goes. So we have to break the cycle. That's the point. And so research has shown that tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is one of the principal pro-inflammatory cytokines. So in the body, there's, like I said, there's cytokines that suppress inflammation, and there's cytokines that fuel up inflammation, or like fuel or petrol to a fire. And tumor necrosis factor alpha is one of the strong pro-inflammatory cytokines that's released from fat cells. It activates the expression of several proteins that suppress insulin signaling pathways, making the human body less responsive to insulin, increasing the risk of insulin resistance. And as we've seen before in a number of talks and sharing times, insulin resistance is the final common pathway, or the base denominator, that's common across a wide spectrum of disease in the body. If you want to sort out one of the key things that brings on disease and death and cancer risk, it's insulin resistance. And your fat content fundamentally increases your risk of insulin resistance. And we'll look a bit more at that. So what are some of the causes of insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is where, for those of you who are not aware, where your tissue has become resistant to the effects of your own insulin. We know that when you take a meal containing carbohydrate like glucose, gets into your blood, has to get into the cell. The body makes insulin from the pancreas, and that insulin is like the key which unlocks the receptor, which lets the glucose into the cell. And over time, if there's too much carbohydrate around, too much saturated fat, that receptor doesn't respond to the insulin anymore, and the glucose doesn't get into the cell. The body makes more insulin, and your insulin goes up and up and up and up. It's a vicious cycle. So these are the things that can cause insulin resistance. Obesity. It is very important for each of us to reach our ideal body weight at every age of life. Obesity and excess fat are not cute, they are life-threatening. And there are many reasons for why we get overweight. And just to park a little thought on this as well, we need to be sensitive with each other when it comes to weight loss, because some people struggle in this area is more than others, and there are reasons for that. Genetics affect your carbohydrate tolerance. There are different things that make the struggle a bit harder for others. Everybody can do it, but some have to work harder to achieve their ideal body weight. And so it requires sensitivity when we deal with each other. And, the tendencies when we see it's other ways to listen, that person's obviously just eating too much and just has no self-control, And that's not always the case. Sorry, someone's not muted. So sensitivity with each other on our health journeys, including reaching our ideal weights, is important. But all of us can do it. It's just a matter of how much work we have to put in. So cause of insulin resistance: obesity, eating a diet that's high in sugar and processed foods. Importantly, saturated fat. There's long been a debate about what increases our insulin resistance risk more. Is it saturated fat or carbs? And the balance of the evidence seems to favor saturated fat, but certainly refined carbohydrates are part of the problem. So none of us should be eating refined carbohydrates. We know that. But certainly saturated fats that are high in animal food-based diets are a big cause of insulin resistance and weight gain, because they're calorically dense and they engender insulin resistance inherently. Physical inactivity. So Priscilla and I have just started cycling here in the Cape. It's just absolutely amazing. It's such a beautiful place to do that. And it's incredible what a difference exercise makes to so many aspects of your health. And none of us can afford to treat it as an optional extra. We have to engage in something that we enjoy and do regularly. Physical inactivity is really a killer. Inflammation causes insulin resistance, imbalances in the gut microbiome. If you have the wrong bugs in your stomach, you can be more inflamed. You can have a pro-inflammatory microbiome. And they've shown that, like we've mentioned before, two mice are genetically identical. Just by changing their gut microbiome, the one will become obese and the one won't. So the kind of bugs we carry really has a fundamental impact on our metabolism. Poor sleep habits, sleep apnea, and genetics. We're going to touch on that a bit later when it comes to neuroinflammation. So insulin resistance, here we are. Hunger and cravings. We take a high-carb, high-fat diet, and we cause that problem I've just given you the cycle to. But what happens is, when you're insulin resistant, now this is important to understand, your hunger hormones get all messed up, because the more insulin resistant you are, the less effective that insulin is. And so the glucose is still not getting well into the cell. So you're still hungry. Your body's releasing hunger hormones. And the only way to solve this problem is to break the cycle. You have to fast. You have to exercise, use what you have, change the composition of what you're putting in. You eat a nutrient-dense, not a calorically dense diet. And each of us has to come to understand what our carbohydrate tolerance is. As I said, a 15-year-old can eat far more carbohydrate than I can without gaining weight. And we have to understand what our carbohydrate tolerance is. But the point is we should all be eating non-refined carbohydrates. No, obviously, no refined carbohydrates. But it's important to understand this vicious cycle. When you're insulin resistant, you're always going to be hungry, even though you're eating a lot of the wrong stuff. And your hunger is well controlled when you start to restore insulin sensitivity. We'll have time for questions at the end if you would like some. How do you overcome them? You fast. TRF is the big buzzword now. It's time-restricted feeding. So I'm trying to stick to 2 meals a day now. I don't need 3 meals a day at this stage of my life. I need more nutrients, fewer calories, and 2 meals a day is enough for most of us that are not laborers. If you're a heavy, laboring person, that's different. Eating a nutrient-dense and a lower calorie diet, exercise, sleep, weight loss. Something we all need to improve in, or certainly me, is fasting. Fasting is extremely healing to the body. It's anti-inflammatory. It allows the inflammatory cytokines to settle down. You're not abusing the gut. It allows the brain to settle down its inflammation. A very powerful, simple tool that's free that all of us can do is fasting, and incorporating fasting as a healthy tool into our lifestyle. And it's a great time for spiritual clarity. So there's a reason the Bible talks about fasting. Diet and inflammation. So the next major trigger of inflammation or source is what we're putting in. We're eating pro-inflammatory diets. So we've spoken about stress. We've spoken about aging. We've spoken about, now we're talking about the kind of fuel that we're putting in. Highly processed, saturated fats, fried foods, omega-6 based oils. These things are very, very pro-inflammatory. Refined carbohydrates. These are the things that really set off the fire of inflammation in your system. The problem with inflammation is that for the first part, for the initial period, for the most part, it's a silent killer. Just like hypertension, is you don't initially feel it. But then you start to, if it's chronic, you start to see its effects down the line. So let's look at that. So look at that picture, the typical pro-inflammatory diet. Foods with a higher pro-inflammatory potential are red meat, processed meat, organ meat, refined carbohydrates such as white bread, white rice, many desserts, sweetened beverages, including colas and sports drinks. Most of us know all too well, or have access all too well to that kind of food, and that's a classically pro-inflammatory diet that will set up inflammation in your system. Sugary foods, refined carbohydrates, fried foods. You must remember, foods were never meant to be fried. Frying foods is a massive free radical stress in the body. And the body has antioxidant protection systems. It has things like superoxide dismutase, little enzymes and stuff that are designed to be part of the antioxidant protection system that are easily overwhelmed when we exceed the demand on those systems. And when we eat, those foods are laden in free radicals. Free radicals themselves cause damage, which cause inflammation. And so it's a vicious cycle. A diet like that will leave you inflamed and cause oxidative stress. So diets rich in saturated fat, trans fats, or refined sugar associated with high production of pro-inflammatory molecules, especially individuals with diabetes or an overweight individual. Smoking. I know I'm singing to the choir. I really hope I am to everybody. But this is one of the worst things man has ever invented. And Satan was behind this one for sure. This is one of the worst things we can do for ourselves. The free radical stress induced from smoking a cigarette and the chemical load. It's crazy. If people really understood it, they just would never start. So you've got oxidative stress, inflammation, tissue damage, inactivation of tissue repair, a massive favoring the pro-inflammatory stimulus to an anti-inflammatory stimulus of smoking. Sex hormones, something else that affects our net inflammatory. So we're just touching on things that affect our net degree of inflammation in the body. Male and female hormones. whether or not your testosterone is adequate or not, whether or not your estrogen is balanced. These 6 hormones can settle down inflammation in the body. Your hormonal status affects your net inflammatory status. And that's an important concept to keep in mind. Sleep. If you are sleep deprived, you're inflamed. And not only are you inflamed, your brain is inflamed. So they've shown that sleep deprivation and sleep disruption causes neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation that is left chronic basically destroys your brain. So disrupted sleep, disturbed sleep, not prioritizing sleep. Again, when you're young, we wear sleep deprivation as an accolade. We say, oh, I got by on 6 hours of sleep, or I got by on 5. That's not an accolade. That's silliness. We're designed to sleep a third of our lives, and it's necessary for repair and healing and creating a calm internal environment. And sleep is one of my favorite activities. I get very little of it at the moment, but I do love it. It's so profoundly important. So prioritize sleep. Create a sleep routine that works for you, and make sure it's not one of your number one priorities. The next day, the success of your next day starts with your previous night's sleep. We could have a whole talk on sleep again sometime, but such an important topic. But no sleep, disrupted sleep, means neuroinflammation. Inflammation in the cardiovascular system. So this old adage, so looking now at various systems, how inflammation affects very different systems of the body. Looking at the cardiovascular system, there's this old adage, when we get old, we burn up, we swell up, we dry out, and we turn to stone. And that's what happens when we are not getting the right nutrients and when we're on a pro-inflammatory diet. So what that means is we get inflamed, we burn up and swell up, we dry out, we dehydrate, and we calcify. And so calcification often happens where inflammation has been on the go. And the classical example of that is on the lining of the blood vessel wall. You don't get a heart attack unless you've had inflamed oxidized cholesterol lining the vessel wall that has ruptured a plaque, formed a thrombus or a clot, and then you get disruption of the blood supply and you get a heart attack. So inflammation is a key factor involved in cardiovascular disease. And the body's almost using cholesterol, like we mentioned before, as a patchwork to try and address the issue that's happening on the vessel wall. So yeah, so let's go. Sorry, I'll go back one. So just to give you an idea, so if the lining of your blood vessel is called the endothelium, you have various things that damage the lining of the blood vessel. So blood sugar swings, free radical stress, these things damage the endothelial cells. The body puts cholesterol over that, and that cholesterol gets inflamed, and it gets capped with some calcium. So inflammation is an integral part. If you don't, it's inflamed oxidized cholesterol that's really damaging to the cardiovascular system. So yeah, we see the calcification effects in the aorta. You're not supposed to see your aorta on an X-ray. The fact that you're seeing this person's abdominal aorta dividing into the iliac arteries means they're totally calcified, which means that blood vessel is not distensible, it's not flexible, and it's prone to rupture. So we did vascular surgery last week on a guy. I mean, you must see the effects of smoking on our internal vessels. It's just scary, scary stuff. He had a massive abdominal aortic aneurysm. That's why we actually couldn't speak last Thursday. We were busy with a guy that was in this state. He had a massive aneurysm, and we just scooped out foul, decaying tissue from this aneurysm and thrombus, in the operation. So this is what's happening inside of us. We need to stop the inflammatory process and the calcification that's letting our arteries get up in this condition. So here's the pathway I was telling you about: endothelial insult. So hypertension, blood sugar swings, oxidative stress cause inflammation, which is then calcified. And then that calcium plaque ruptures and you get a clot that forms. This is a CT scan of the coronary arteries. What you don't know can get you. You don't know what the status of your arteries are like at the moment. And we sometimes carry the sins of years ago inside of us. And the bad choices of years ago. But the good thing is that good health choices can reverse a number of those. But here's coronary arteries that are calcified, and your degree of coronary artery calcification fundamentally correlates with your atherosclerotic risk and your heart disease, heart attack risk. You're not supposed to have calcified coronary arteries, and that's from inflammation. Inflammation is part of this process. Okay, we'll move past that one. So the gut, the next thing is the gut. The gut is one of the major sources of inflammation and autoimmunity and neurodegenerative diseases. You want to fix the brain, fix the gut. You want to cut off a major source of inflammation in the system, make sure your gut is as healthy as possible. Can't be overemphasized. The gut-brain connection and the brain-gut connection. Leaky gut, leaky brain. Must be understood. So food allergies and intestinal hyperpermeability. So we've spoken about this a lot, so I'm not going to focus too much on it, but lining your gut, there's these intestinal cells which are supposed to be held together by tight junctions here. When you eat things that your gut barrier has been disrupted, you become sensitive to various components of your food that should be innocuous. And this causes an inflammatory response that starts at the gut level. And this inflammation seeds into the systemic system. So the rest of the body becomes inflamed. If your gut's inflamed, your body becomes inflamed. If your body's inflamed, your blood-brain barrier is inflamed and your brain is inflamed, which explains why people that are sensitive to gluten or dairy cannot have clear thoughts and become tired and fatigued and are mentally slow after eating things they're allergic to, because they're having an inflammatory response in their brain. And this is the reality. This is not hocus pocus. This is what's happening. So there's a protein called zonulin. Zonulin is a protein that increases the permeability of the gut cells, or they're normally linked together like they're holding arms. Zonulin is upregulated in people that have become sensitive to gluten. And so they get this leaky gut syndrome, which then allows food particles to get into the blood system. And those food particles can travel through the circulation, and in a leaky brain, blood-brain barrier, which you're going to look at just now, get straight into the brain, and they trigger inflammation in the brain. And that chronic inflammation causes degeneration in your brain and affects your cognition. Autism has increased 178% since the year 2000. So now we need to look at some of the consequences of gut-induced inflammation. Why is every second child being diagnosed with autism? So look at this graph. So many of you will have heard of glyphosate. Glyphosate is the weed killer that they're spraying on wheat. And glyphosate has been shown scientifically to directly damage the gut lining. And it breaks the gut cells apart, which allows the gut to become hyperpermeable. And the incidence of glyphosate use closely mirrors the climb in the incidence of autism. So this graph is very telling. And the incidence of other neurodegenerative conditions have closely mirrored the use of glyphosate. Glyphosate was originally called Agent Orange, as many of you will know. It was used in the Vietnam War to clear the forests as a weed killer. And now they use it in commercial farming for weed control. It works by inhibiting a pathway in the soil, in the bacteria called the shikimate pathway. And in so doing, it actually decreases the production of aromatic amino acids called like tyrosine and tryptophan, which are some of the things that our brain uses to make dopamine and serotonin. So glyphosate is something that is not innocuous, and it's a very interesting graph that mirrors the incidence of the climb in autism. And autism is one of the examples of a neurodegenerative condition that may well be linked to disrupted gut barriers. So brain glyphosate correlates with increased tumor necrosis factor alpha levels, suggesting that exposure to this herbicide may trigger neuroinflammation in the brain, which may induce changes that are seen in neurodegenerative disorders. So something to keep in mind when, and especially not everybody becomes gluten sensitive, but gluten sensitivity has skyrocketed. And glyphosate, I believe, based on my research and reading, is one of the main reasons for that. And also the fact that obviously they've changed genetic modification of the wheat and things, that we're not eating the same kind of wheat that we used to have. There's genetic engineering and hybridization, and we've made the proteins that we're exposed to more antigenic in so doing. In other words, they're more stimulatory to the immune system. They're more likely to elicit an immune response. This is important to understand. So we need to get back to eating food as God designed it and made it, whole foods, and looking after ourselves, because if the Lord doesn't come soon, we're going to kill ourselves. This is what man is doing. It's just unreal. So which foods are most likely to set your brain on fire? The two most powerful promoters of inflammation in our modern diet are refined carbohydrates. So not the AVOs. The AVOs was just a nice picture I found. The AVOs are lovely and they're great for you. But refined carbohydrates and refined vegetable oils, those sunflower oils, those canola oils, you don't want to be using those things. And when you go to McDonald's or KFC, which hopefully you don't do too often, if at all, that oil that you're frying those chips in, it's been there for a long time, and that is sunflower oil. And it's an omega-6 fat. It's pro-inflammatory. It's full of free radicals. It's providing a toxic load to your blood vessels and your brain. Not the oil to be eating. Avocado, great choice. Great choice. So glyphosate exposure induces inflammatory responses in the small intestine and alters gut microbial composition in rats. So what are some of the common food allergens? If you've noticed a difference in how you feel after eating certain foods, these are some of the common food allergens: gluten, casein, egg albumin, soy for some, yeast, and lectins. Now, lectins are plant proteins, are plant compounds that you might have heard about. There's a book called The Plant Paradox, which I did read. So some plant foods do have pro-inflammatory molecules on them, which is why we have to prepare them properly. Things like beans and legumes have to be cooked properly, and pressure cooking removes a lot of the lectins. But certainly lectins are something to keep in mind in terms of not properly prepared plant foods. And if you have a particular inflammatory, sensitivity, you might want to also look at the influence of certain lectins. But the point is, these are some of the common ones that people can struggle with in terms of sensitivities. And as I said, for gluten, bear in mind, a lot of it's because of what man has done to the protein. Another thing to keep in mind, inflammation, if your adrenals, through chronic stress, our adrenals can get behind in terms of the capacity to cope. You might become more inflamed because your adrenal glands are not functioning well. So if your adrenal glands are making all sorts of important hormones like cortisol, and cortisol is an anti-inflammatory hormone. And so if your adrenal glands are a bit behind or you're burnt out, you might need to give them some attention to address the inflammation in your system. So you might react to things when you're adrenally fatigued that you wouldn't otherwise react to, is what I'm saying, because they would help keep those things in check. So that's another important consideration. Right, now my favorite topic, this is the most important thing, the brain. So all of this is leading up to, so we've seen that stress increases our inflammatory level, age increases our inflammatory level, a disrupted gut barrier increases our inflammatory level, poor dietary choices, processed fats, refined carbohydrates increase our inflammation in the body. So allergies and sensitivities to those things. But ultimately, all of these things are affecting the blood-brain barrier. And so it's important to conceptualize the barriers in the body and their important functions. So the major barriers are the skin, the inner lining of the gut, the blood-brain barrier. These are defense systems that the various organ systems have in place to regulate the environment of the organ they supply, or the system that they're servicing, essentially. So, but in this context of the brain, the most important thing is the blood-brain barrier, which is a vascular arrangement, which we'll look at now. So this is what's happening with many of us. We're ending up with a brain on fire. And as you can appreciate, if your brain's inflamed, you're not going to be thinking very clearly and making your best decisions, and we'll see why now. But many people are walking around with a brain on fire. And since I got into this kind of medicine, it's made me realize that a lot of people's difficult behavior, a lot of our own difficult behavior, and we've got to own our own stuff, is when we're not in a healthy internal space. And if your brain is inflamed, you can be anxious, you can be depressed, you can be moody, you can be not functioning in one or other area where you otherwise would function quite fine were you not inflamed and were you not toxic. And that's how profound it is. So this is very, very important. This is ultimately the most important, because this is where God communicates with us. Is what is the status of our brains? Are we in a healthy space? So this just shows you the impact on inflammation on tryptophan metabolism. So we know tryptophan is one of the aromatic amino acids that produces serotonin. Tyrosine produces dopamine. And we see that pro-inflammatory cytokines, a pro-inflammatory status in the brain, actually diverts tryptophan metabolism away from serotonin production and into a pro-inflammatory pathway, ending up in a product called quinolinic acid. So whether or not your brain is inflamed can determine how it's metabolizing and whether or not it's making the right levels of monoamine neurotransmitters. When your brain is inflamed, you're actually diverting things away from the happy, balanced state, and your brain is dying, essentially. Now, remember that not all inflammation is bad. Sometimes if there's an infection in the brain, your body needs to deal with that infection. And so an inflammatory response during an infective process is appropriate. But a chronic inflammatory response is not appropriate. And we need to be looking at the things that cause chronic inflammation and switching those things off. That's what this is really all about. So the blood-brain barrier is an amazing structure. So this is the vascular space. This is the stained parenchymal cells of the brain. And these are supportive oligodendrocytes, or the supportive cells of the nervous system that encase the brain tissue. So the blood cells would run here. And so these collectively form the blood-brain barrier. So a healthy brain, for our synapses to work well, we need the right controlled environment. And that environment requires the right amount of ions, the right amount of glucose, the right amount of everything, so that the pumps lining the membranes of the neurons are actually able to function as they should. The more toxins, the more inflammatory stimulus that are allowed through that blood-brain barrier, the more that process is disrupted and neuronal function declines. And ultimately, if left untreated, neuronal death ensues. So these are some things that are related to blood-brain barrier disruption or impairment: stroke, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. And it's important to understand things like MS. There can be this is an autoimmune condition. There are things. So autoimmunity is basically like molecular mimicry, where your immune system has recognized something that should otherwise be seen as fairly innocuous as a threat, and that antibody that the body has made to that stimulus cross-reacts with another tissue or protein that looks similar in your body. That's the basis for autoimmunity. And in multiple sclerosis, there's a protein called myelin binding protein, which binds the myelin sheath around the neuron. And so when your body attacks that myelin binding protein, it actually disrupts that sheath, and that's the basis for multiple sclerosis. So a lot of neurodegenerative conditions have autoimmunity and inflammation as their base. In fact, more and more are being found to have inflammation as their base. And so a lot of the things that we think are inevitable parts of aging, or inevitable that we just have to get, are a consequence of neuroinflammation and neurotoxicity, which we can fundamentally have an impact over. And that's the exciting thing. Through our choices, we can change this. We can really change this. So this is the schematic of the blood-brain barrier. And so you'll see it's just a capillary with a few podocytes of various supportive cells of the nervous system around it. So they're trying to say, listen, I know you've got some good stuff in there, but I'm not letting everything through. I'm going to let this in, let that in, but not that. Just like your gut barrier is supposed to be doing for the rest of your body, so the blood-brain barrier is doing for the brain. And when this blood-brain barrier becomes disrupted through inflammation and those processes we were speaking about, then it's a free-for-all. The gates are open. Whatever's in the blood can get into the brain. And that systemic inflammation, if systemic inflammation is happening in that capillary, it incites neuroinflammation in the brain tissue. And the main neuronal cell that's the main oligodendrocyte or supportive cell that's responsible for inflammation are these microglial cells. So you'll see these microglial cells are part of the brain immune system, and they're the ones that become chronically activated in systemic inflammation, and they normally function to remove decaying old neurons, amyloid plaque, keeping the brain clean. When they become stimulated by threat or stress or inflammation, they become activated and they start to destroy the brain. And if they're chronically activated, they cause neurodegeneration. So these microglial cells are a key component of the process that causes neurodegeneration. So microglial neuroinflammation, crucial pathological mechanism in traumatic brain injury. The other thing is traumatic brain injury. We need to be engaging activities where we can take care of our heads. So, you know, we don't have to be neurotic, but certain activities increase our risk of a traumatic brain injury. And traumatic brain injury has been shown to be associated, even well after the event, with ongoing neuroinflammation. So a lot of these microglial cells, once they become activated, they become chronically activated until they die. And so an isolated, significant traumatic brain injury can be associated with quite a protracted period of neuroinflammation. And so we need to, if we go mountain biking like we're doing, if you go cycling, wear a helmet, be sensible. Don't try and do triple backflips when you're 50, you know, it's like, so it's common sense. And when your kids make choices about sports, choose something where they don't have to put their heads at risk. You know, these are simple, common sense things. You know, life happens, but make good choices is the point. So the innate immune system responses are considered the first line of defense against invading pathogens. The activation of microglia is protective for the brain. However, sustained or chronic activation of microglia can lead to irreversible CNS damage. Persistent inflammation in the brain affects neuronal plasticity, impairs memory, and is generally considered a typical driver of tissue damage in neurodegenerative disorders. So in the neurodegenerative processes, chronically activated microglia release things like tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-6, interleukin-1 beta, reactive oxygen species, and excitotoxins, including glutamate. Okay. So neuroinflammation, just in finishing off, how's our time, eh? I think we're nearly done, eh?
You've got a few more minutes. You got 6 minutes, but if we need more time, carry on.
Okay, let's go. So neuroinflammation, the last thing. So what are the symptoms of neuroinflammation? The brain doesn't feel pain, but these are some of the symptoms your brain could be inflamed. Brain fog. I'm sure everybody knows what brain fog is. Where you just feel cloudy and not yourself, and you feel slow, unclear thoughts, low brain endurance, loss of brain function after trauma, brain fatigue, and poor mental focus after meals. Brain fatigue associated with systemic inflammation. Brain fatigue related to chemical scents and pollutants. Some of these symptoms can mean you've got neuroinflammation. And that neuroinflammation is a warning sign. And you need to say, what's causing my neuroinflammation? And what do I need to do about it? Don't just ignore it. Dementia, we're not supposed to end up in a rocking chair not remembering our spouse's name. It's not normal. And the brain has faced years of onslaught to get into that kind of condition. And there's multiple factors that cause that, but certainly one of them is neuroinflammation. So neuroinflammation can cause rapid brain degeneration, increasing risk of dementia, Parkinson's, and other degenerative conditions. Brain aging has been more related to the brain's immune cells than the neurons. Learning how to spot and dampen brain inflammation can help you better enjoy brain functions, slowing the aging process and lowering your risk of diseases such as Alzheimer's. When the brain is healthy, the microglial cells dispose. We've spoken about that. Okay. So this is important. Brain inflammation shuts down energy production. So it affects your mitochondria and the neurons. This is why you're so tired when your brain's inflamed. You just can't think straight. Brain endurance drops, making it harder to read, work, or concentrate for any length of time. This also leads to depression. Factors that cause brain inflammation. If you have symptoms of brain inflammation, you want to address any of the following: diabetes or high blood sugar. Do not allow yourself to be on a diet that causes unstable fuel supply to your brain. We know the brain can run on fat, it can run on glucose, it can run on both under the right conditions, but you need a stable fuel supply. An unstable fuel supply your brain does not enjoy. Lack of exercise makes it, the less you exercise, the more inflamed you get. The more you exercise releases myokines and anti-inflammatory cytokines. Exercise, the right type and the right amount of exercise is anti-inflammatory. And that's important. So lack of exercise, chronic stress, heart failure, previous head trauma, neurological autoimmunity, eating gluten when you're gluten intolerant. And when you're gluten sensitive, one of the hardest things to leave is bread. I've been there. It's very hard. And I still struggle with it because bread is so nice. But if I eat it too much, I pay the price. I experience these symptoms I'm talking about. That's why I know about them. So alcohol and drug abuse, environmental pollutants, inflammatory bowel conditions, leaky blood-brain barrier. These are some of the things that precipitate neuroinflammation. And we said that when your system's inflamed, your blood-brain barrier is destabilized. So look here, this is important. If you start to feel your head clear when addressing brain inflammation, that's a sign you're on the right track. And the nice thing is that there are various foods that are anti-inflammatory and there are various nutrients that are anti-inflammatory for the brain. So these are the things that can help, but you need to address the underlying precipitants for a start. You can't say, I'm going to take the brain anti-inflammatory nutrients and I'm going to eat Kentucky every night. That's not how it works. But you need to make the good choices and put the nutrients on top of that, and you can really take special care of your brain. It's really exciting. You're living in very exciting times. There's so much information out there. Yeah. And now this is an important last concept I want to leave with you, the neurotoxic triad. What they found in the brain is that these three things often coexist and actually feed off each other. So it is comprised of excitotoxicity, oxidative stress, and inflammation. These three things are poison for brain tissue. Excitotoxicity, that's when something like glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, is in oversupply, causes calcium influx into the cells, causes cell death. And there are various things that cause the various types of diet and there's various types of substances that can cause excitotoxicity in the brain. Things like MSG and that kind of thing cause excitotoxicity. But oxidative stress is when you've got lots of free radicals around. Remember, the brain is very much dependent on its healthy fat lining the neurons. The brain is largely a fatty structure. And free radical stress damages that fat structure. And inflammation feeds into that. So they all feed off each other. One makes the other worse. So this neurotoxic triad is key. So here's a picture you can look at in your own time. Once I'm sure Thor May was recording the lecture. If you want to, you can look at this triad, how the different components of the triad fit in and how they potentiate each other. When there's oxidative stress, there's inflammation. When there's inflammation, there's excitotoxicity, et cetera, through various cytokines that are released. But importantly, you see there's certain nutrients that have been shown to actually stop this neurotoxic triad. Vitamin B2, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, folate, B12, magnesium. These are some of the things that can help settle down this triad inside the brain. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Play from current slide. There you go. So we've spoken about microglia. So micronutrients may be a unique weapon against the neurotoxic triad of excitotoxicity, oxidative stress, and neuroinflammation. They are vitamin C and E, glutathione. Oh, we should have a talk on glutathione sometime, eh? That's such an important compound. B2, magnesium. Beating inflammation and fostering an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. To end on a positive note, what do we do about it? Sleep properly, prioritize sleep. Make sure that so these are the how-tos. This is what we must do. Prioritize your sleep. Make sure that you're breathing properly at night. Snoring is not cute. It can be dangerous. If you're not breathing properly at night, you're getting disrupted sleep. That can cause neuroinflammation, upset your blood-brain barrier. I'm just touching on things, but sleep is fundamental. So obstructive sleep apnea increases your risk of blood-brain barrier hyperpermeability and neuroinflammation. Stress, controlling your stress like we've spoken about. Exercise. This slide shows nicely the effects of exercise on decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines. We went for a 27K cycle this morning. You just feel like $1 million when you come back from cycling and we're exercising. It's that important. Such a powerful tool that does so many things. And one of the benefits of exercise is these myokine release. It releases these cytokine-like compounds from the muscles, hence they're called myokines. And they're finding that the benefits of exercise are very closely linked to these myokines that are released. Reaching your healthy body weight. It's not cute to be overweight. It's dangerous. commit yourself to knowing what your ideal body weight is and slowly getting there over time and taking the steps that you need to take to get to your ideal body weight. Fasting. Look at the benefits of fasting: weight loss, cancer prevention, type 2 diabetes, slows aging, reduces inflammation, insulin resistance, boosts human growth hormone, better heart health and brain function. And of course, the spiritual benefits. Healing your gut. If your gut's upset, respect what it's telling you and find out what it doesn't like. And there's ways of doing that. We can talk about that and heal it, because otherwise you will be inflamed all the time. Choosing an anti-inflammatory plant-based diet with food that is properly prepared. Prioritizing protecting your brain. And this is a great book, Why Isn't My Brain Working? It's written by a guy called Datus Karazian. And he addresses many of these principles that I've touched on today. And this is a great interview there with him on one of the modern podcast shows. But yeah, that's it. I think that's the overview. And I hope that was helpful.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bruce. That was very, very insightful. I'm just going to allow some time for questions. Does anybody have any questions for the doctor?
I've always got a question, Dr. Bruce. Good to see
Micah,
you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Thank you for your interesting presentation.
Welcome.
I have a question. If Brian's mom passed away from Alzheimer's in May, my father has vascular dementia and now colon cancer, and I mean he's 86. But is this why we are seeing so much Alzheimer's and various forms of dementia these days, because the brains are inflamed?
Absolutely. So like I said, there's a genetic vulnerability to a lot of these conditions, and certainly Alzheimer's. There are certain genotypes that increase your risk of getting dementia. But absolutely, I firmly believe that chronic neuroinflammation and neurotoxicity from disrupted physiology and poor lifestyle choices is aging brains way faster than they should be aging. And if we don't, those of us that are listening and are interested in this, if we don't address these things in ourselves, we put ourselves at risk of these things. And this is the great thing about this. I mean, we live in the age of information. There's so much out there, and I'm telling you. So to answer your question, absolutely is the answer. But the exciting thing is that there's so much we can do to prevent it once we know about it. And that's what I'm trying to do, because I saw a lot of these factors operative in my own life. And I was, I've done the whole functional medicine thing, and it's just, the answers are there. They're in our face if we just take time to read and apply and be disciplined to apply. So yes, our brains are facing an environment that we're never designed to face. And so they're aging, and we're putting them at massive risk. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. God's Child has a question.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Bruce. I came on late, so I'm going to have to listen to the recording again. But tell me, are you aware of any correlation with air pollution and dementia or just, inflammation of the brain?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the things that I didn't have time to address is that your detoxification system is fundamentally important in controlling the load. Remember that every system that we have is the cardiovascular system, the gastrointestinal system, the immune system is designed ultimately to create an environment that optimizes brain function. So the general answer to your question is that I do believe that toxic load, of which air pollution is one example, is certainly a component of the load that our brains are being placed under. Because if, for instance, and it all works together, if you have a gut barrier that's disrupted, if you've got leaky gut syndrome from chronically eating gluten or having a dysbiosis, a bug that shouldn't be there, remember, your liver's being overloaded and barraged with a whole bunch of things that shouldn't be coming into the system. And so that toxic load, affects the capacity and what spills over into the rest of the circulation. The liver is like the great sentinel from the gut that's trying to protect what gets into the system. And when that liver and your detox system and your detox organs are overloaded, you're getting toxic load coming into the circulation that shouldn't otherwise be there. And remember, the brain is very fatty. So if you've got fat-soluble toxins, where do they go? They go to the brain. So yes, air pollutants, chemical pollutants, the kind of perfumes we use, the makeup, the deodorants, these things collectively can form a toxic burden onto the system. And the way they affect us is fundamentally determined by the status of the detoxification pathways and whether or not they're overloaded and where they end up and their inherent chemical nature. But certainly they can have an effect, absolutely. And the brain loves a detoxified state. It loves an anti-inflammatory state. It loves a stable fuel supply. It loves enough antioxidants. It doesn't like free radicals. It doesn't like inflammation. And it does, as I said, it doesn't like toxins. So that's the general answer to your question.
Okay. Oh, another thing. Have you heard of any studies with the use of insulin mist being shot in the nose to help with Alzheimer's?
Insulin mist.
Yeah, it has something to do with the blood sugar and the use of insulin to help because Alzheimer is what, type 3? Yeah.
Type 3, correct.
Yeah, so yeah, someone was telling me about a study they used and they saw that it helped with Alzheimer.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. Dementia has been called type 3 diabetes, but bear in mind it's a milieu of this free radical stress, inflammation, probably toxicity. There's a whole bunch of things that are happening, and certainly when I haven't seen a paper on the insulin mist, to be honest. I haven't seen that, but certainly insulin's not a free ride when you're dealing with. So in the Alzheimer's brain, that might be a consequence. And if there is such a paper, it may show some benefit in the acute treatment, but it's not addressing the primary causes and antecedents. So, for instance, in type 2 diabetes, if you have to go onto insulin, it's actually a sign of failure, because while what I'm trying to say is while there might be acute benefit, and I'd have to read the paper if such one exists, it's not treating the primary cause. The primary cause of dementias are genetic vulnerability, toxins, neuroinflammation, free radical stress, and accumulation. But yes, with all of that, the metabolism of the brain is probably affected, and insulin might have a role. But fasting, cleaning the brain out, providing nutrients for brain repair, these are the things that I would like to focus on as part of the treatment program, without necessarily foregoing what might be beneficial in the acute phase. But if you leave it there, you might not get the best outcome, is what I'm saying.
Okay. Last question. I don't know if you've touched on the vaccine, how that crossed the blood-brain barrier. I understand oregano crosses it also and can deal with whatever inflammation is going on. Have you have any studies about that?
So I haven't read about oregano, but certainly, so when it comes to COVID, we're all hearing about this long COVID story. And as part of that, you can have this sort of low-grade encephalitis. And one of the theories is that, the basis of autoimmunity is molecular mimicry, where your body makes an antibody to a protein, which might be, in this case, the spike protein or the core protein or the envelope protein of the SARS-CoV virus, and then reacts against a protein that is similar in the brain tissue, or the protein from the COVID virus itself crosses the disrupted blood-brain barrier, ends up in a part of the brain tissue, and the antibody incites an inflammatory response at that point. So that's certainly possible. But in terms of nutrients that can help that, things like EGCG, curcumin, the natural plant-based anti-inflammatories have been suggested to have some benefit. Like I said, also vitamin C, vitamin E, magnesium, B2, B6, folate, B12. Oregano may well be. Oregano, I know, has good antifungal and antimicrobial properties. I haven't seen its particular application in terms of COVID scenario. But certainly there are theories about COVID proteins being quite antigenic and causing molecular mimicry as part of the potential basis for chronic or long COVID. May, I think you muted.
Sorry. Thank you. God's child, are all your questions answered?
Well,
Is
I
that
did
all?
have one more. I did have one more, but I didn't want to hog everything in case someone else had questions.
Okay, can we ask
Dr. Bruce, two more questions. The ideal body weight. Is there a different ideal body weight for each person, whatever makes them feel?
Yeah.
You know, I know they have a standardized chart and they say, you know, this is what it should be.
Yes.
But some people don't feel good at that weight. So is there an ideal body weight for each person?
There is for each person. So based on your height and gender, there are well-established formulas that we use. For instance, in if I see a patient for a surgery, if they're a male or female, there's a formula one can use, their height minus 100 or the height minus 105, depending on whether they're male or female, in terms of centimeters, to get an ideal kilogram mass for that patient. So some drugs have to be given based on ideal body weight. Some drugs have to be given on lean body weight. Some have to be given on actual body weight. But yes, to answer your question, there is an ideal body weight for each person. And you may not feel, so there may be some give or take around that is the point, you know, in terms of a few kgs here and there. But each of us needs to know what our ideal body weight is and be moving towards it. And I say that at every age, and bear in mind it gets harder as you age, for the reasons we've outlined, but it is still possible. And if we want to decrease our risk of cardiovascular disease, if we want to decrease our risk of dementia, if we want to decrease our risk of all of these things, then there's certain things that just have to be in place, and an ideal body weight is one of those things. But yes, it is so it's generally your age. I think in women, if I remember correctly, it's age minus 105 in centimeters. So if your height, say your height is 165, minus 105 or 100 from that, and then you'll get your ideal mass in kilograms.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Thank you very much. And the last question, sleep apnea. Is there, are you aware of any breathing exercise that can help with that? Absolutely.
So a very, very dangerous condition, sleep apnea, if left undiagnosed and untreated. So with time, if you pick up weight, your pharyngeal musculature gets lax, and when your muscle tone decreases with increasing depth of sleep, your upper airway occludes, and you effectively suffocate, and your body wakes you up partially so that you can regain muscle tone and rebreathe, effectively disrupting your sleep quality throughout the night. So there's actually a document where a guy, I can't remember his name, I can give it to May afterwards. He's got a whole bunch of pharyngeal exercises and tongue exercises where you can try and strengthen the musculature of your throat. The first step is to identify where your snoring is occurring. Some snoring occurs a lot higher in people's airways than in other people. And the various ways to pinpoint exactly what part of your airway is causing your occlusion at night. But certainly if you're not at your ideal body weight, that's the place to start. If you're overweight, remember your pharynx gets overweight as well, and you get floppy tissue in your pharynx. And the narrowest part is going to occlude first. So the first place to start is moving towards your ideal body weight. But to answer your question, there's a whole booklet on appropriate exercises to help with sleep apnea, and I can send that to May afterwards.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bruce. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Sure.
Wow, thank you, God's child. Everybody, if you have a question, ask the question. It may be somebody else's question as well. Thank you. Gina has a question. I see your hand up.
Hello, May. Hello, Dr. Bruce.
Hi, Gina.
I have
Hello.
a question. I have a daughter who has an allergy. She's lactose tolerant, but
What, sorry?
I have a daughter who's lactose tolerant.
Okay.
But at the moment she's 12 years old, and she I'd say like fights the allergy. She takes everything that she's not supposed to take because she's sort of like trying to get over the allergy. Is that a good thing or that's a bad thing? Because in future, will she have inflammation or not?
So is she only lactose intolerant?
Yes.
Okay, so lactose is not an allergy. So this is important to differentiate. So lactose is the carbohydrate in milk, and lactase is the enzyme that our bodies normally produce to digest lactose. So there's a difference. One needs to clearly understand there's a difference between milk allergy and lactose intolerance. Lactose is a carbohydrate. Milk allergy is casein or whey related in terms of the proteins in milk. So we generally become allergic or sensitive to protein type molecules. So lactose intolerance is purely, so it depends on her symptoms. If she's getting congestion and blocked nose and lots of mucus from drinking cow's milk, that's an allergy manifestation. If she's getting diarrhea or a loose stool from drinking cow's milk, that's a lactose intolerance manifestation because the bowel is not digesting the lactose. And that's not an allergy, that's an intolerance to the carbohydrate. Whereas an allergy is to the casein or the whey, and that is a different clinical manifestation to a lactose intolerance. So it depends on its symptomatology.
She does have diarrhea, but my question is, in future, she's 12 years old now. In future, could it lead to inflammation?
Not lactose intolerance, no.
Okay.
Because lactose intolerance is not an allergy. It's an inability to digest the carbohydrate in milk. But the best thing you could possibly do for her is to take her off cow's milk. Take her off. Just put her on a plant-based milk. She's 12 years old. And there's so many healthy plant-based milks now. We found one down here called Butternut, and I'm not endorsing them at all, but Butternut, it's very quite a cool name. Buttanut, but a nut.
Okay.
And they've got almond milk, they've got macadamia milk, they've got oat milk, they've got so many different milks. If she's lactose intolerant, I mean, we shouldn't be on cow's milk anyway, so just take her off it.
Okay.
It's best thing forward. But a lactose intolerance, to answer your question, won't increase inflammation per se. It's an intolerance to digesting the carbohydrate. It's not a sensitivity.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Wow. Thank you, Gina. Anybody else with a question for Dr. Bruce? Okay, there's Micah again.
I'm back. I just wanted to find out, is there a point where, I mean, having had a parent die of Alzheimer's, because literally that part of the brain just died off and then that was that. I mean, I'm still, I think, working through the fact that you can die from Alzheimer's. But anyway, I'm learning. Is there a point, Dr. Bruce, of where there is a point of no return? Like, I mean, Brian and I, if we now, get our blood-brain barrier all healthy and all these good things, I mean, is there a point, like I see with my dad now, he's 86, has he reached the point of no return? If he now makes massive changes to his dietary, is that actually going to help?
So great
Sorry,
question.
I know that sounds horrible.
So
my dad is 86. He's got vascular dementia.
Yeah.
But he has a horrendous German diet. Okay.
Yeah. So
But
exactly. So the point, I hear you, and the point is, I'm the eternal optimist. I believe it's never too late to make good choices and changes. Bear in mind that there's a critical mass in the brain, and as you age, I mean, aging is affecting each of us as we're sitting here. We're all aging, and how we age is determined by the balance of the helpful factors versus the balance of the deleterious factors. And so that balance has been going on throughout his life. And now he's in a state, but he's still on a lot of the stimuli that have brought him or probably contributed to his condition. And so it's never too late to change. And my dad's in the same condition. I love him to bits, but I can see his mind is going. And it's part of it's inevitable, but you feel like you want to take them into a little room and give them everything they need because you know what they need, and control the environment. And I'm saying to whatever degree you can help his environment do so. That's what I would say. So change his diet, remove pro-inflammatory foods, measure his homocysteine, get him on B complex and active folate, get him on omega-3s, get him on vitamins B, C, E, vitamin D3, measure his vitamin D. There's so much you can do, and you can phone me and talk to me independently if you want to, but there's so much that can be done. I feel my nature is such that I can't sit by and not do anything when I know there's a lot that can be done to at least try. And that's what I would do.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you have to, of course, have somebody's desire to actually want to change. And therein lies the problem. Because somebody that has the idea that, oh, my body will tell me what it needs, and right now it needs ribs, prawns, and beer. I'm not sure if I can work with that.
Exactly. So that's the point. And the problem is in dementia, you don't have a rational mind either.
No.
So that's part of the challenge, is that you have to, as the child, make decisions, but you also have to deal with the consequences of the person and how they respond. So that's the challenge. Not easy.
No, and I mean, my mom is his primary caretaker at this stage, and well, anyway, let's not go there, otherwise it becomes therapy and not a Zoom meeting.
Thanks to you, Micah. Your situation is not foreign to many of us. We're in the same boat, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those questions. I think they help us all to understand things better. And I think, Bruce, if we go back to the garden, I think that a lot of, the biggest answer to all of our questions and all of our health issues is a lot of it comes from diet. And at least that is in our control. So there's air pollution and there are all these other things that we can't control. But I think the area that we can control, if we do that, it'll pay off in big ways. So
Absolutely.
I think, that whole foods, plant-based diet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that there's like 4 modifiables that you can really influence to a great degree: nutrition, exercise, stress, and sleep. Those, if you start with those big 4, and then put some intelligent supplements on top of those, because the science is out there. There's so much we can do to increase our longevity and productivity, and that's what we're trying to do. Is to, for me, the goal is health span. Increase the number of years that are productive and beneficial to yourself in the service for God and others. That's what it's about, is increasing health span. To become demented at 60 is a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. It's a shortening of our usefulness. It's exciting times. It's exciting.
Yeah. Thanks again, Dr. Bruce. I can't say thank you enough for joining us. A lot of you are on our medical missionary training program. Some of you are not. If you would like to join, you can go onto our website, www.mmtinstitute.co.za, and you can get some more information there. And this is part of what we do, some of these webinars, just so that we can learn more about certain diseases, about what we can do to prevent or even reverse some of these diseases. So please, if you would like to join us, you can join. If you would like to get the recording of this, because all the medical missionaries they'll know where to go to get the recording. But if you are not a medical missionary or on our program, you can just send me your email address, or you can put it in the chat box. Put your email address in the chat box, and then I will send you the link to this recording. And thank you, Dr. Bruce. He has so graciously allowed us to record this meeting. I also just want to let you know, if you are in need of general wellness or weight loss or any kind of help around eating and struggles, disease problems, whatever, you can contact me. I do run an 8-week or between an 8 and a 12-week program to help with weight loss, to help with just getting you. I'm a certified health coach, so I try to coach people into eating healthier, and I've seen a lot of amazing results, and people are just living better, much better lives. Okay, so so go ahead, put your email in the chat box, and we will get back to you with the link to this recording. I hope that you have all been blessed. I definitely have. And I just want to thank Bruce Webb again. Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Lovely to be with you. Thanks, May.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. That concludes our session for today. This is our last session for this year. Next year, we will resume. We'll start in about mid-January. We'll start with webinars again. Thank you.
Have a good holiday, everyone.
Thank you. Have a
Thank you
good.
so much.
Take care.
Thank you
Cheers,
so
bye.
much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.